from Genesis 9. Well, that's cool. Verse 9. And this is after the flood. God is speaking to Noah. Now behold, I myself do establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the cattle, and every beast of the earth with you, of all that comes out of the earth, out of the ark, and every beast of the earth. And I establish my covenant with you, and all flesh shall never again be cut off by water of the flood, neither shall there again be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, This is the sign of the covenant which I am making between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all successive generations. I set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be a sign of a covenant between me and the earth. And it shall come about, when I bring a cloud over the earth, that the bow shall be seen in the cloud. And I will remember my covenant which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and never again shall the water become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the cloud, I will look upon it, to remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. And God said to Noah, This is the sign of the covenant which I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth. You may be seated. So, I really appreciate the fact that somebody brought up the lightning last night or this morning. It was pretty fantastic. I really enjoy lightning. I've never been hit. I don't plan on getting hit. But it's been close a couple of times. I like to take pictures of lightning, and it's been close. I've felt it once or twice, which is really exciting. For me, anyway. But just the fact that that in all this scare, some people don't like lightning. Some people do not care for the lightning or the storms, whatever. But in the heart of all that, there's this promise that says, God says, I will not destroy the earth with a flood again, that there's this covenant. So when the storm, we always have, we have this concept of after the storm, there's this rainbow, which is a nice metaphor for after the storm, or after something in life, there's always, a positive side. I think it's amazing that even that there's also the idea that God is in control. There's this rainbow that says, hey, I will never destroy the earth again. There's also this lightning that says, I'm still in charge. So I think it's a nice thing to remember. Thanks for that, because that was cool. That was nothing to do with the message. That was just cool. Okay, so we're going to talk about road signs today. And as a teacher, I'm a teacher primarily. I like to give tests. So I hope you have pen and paper, because I like to give tests. If not, I also allow my students to use their cell phone for writing answers down on only, not for texting each other the answers. So this is church, no cheating. So the first question I have is, let's see if this works. There we go. Okay. You've seen this sign before, I hope. And by the way, I also like a little bit of interaction, so I'll actually say to somebody, I'll tell you, if somebody wants to raise their hand and answer this question, don't just yell it out, but you can answer it. I'll raise your hand and I'll call on you. If you did not have a map with you, if you were not traveling with any sort of GPS device, and you were on the road, and the sun is behind the clouds, so you don't have any shadows, and all you saw was this sign as you drove past it, how do you know which direction you are going? Well, that's a tough one, huh? You have an answer?
Well, I believe in the United States, all highways with the odd number run north and south. So you would either be going north or south. So if the sun was on your right-hand side, and then you would be going...
Time of day in the morning, yeah, right?
But if it was morning, it was on your right-hand side, then you would be going north.
Awesome, thank you. That's great. So yeah. Right? We've had that discussion before. So in the United States, roads that are north and south are odd numbered, and roads that go east and west are even numbered. And in the east-west, for east-west routes, the lowest numbers are in the south, and for the west coast, east-west routes, the lowest numbers are in the south, and for the north-south routes, the lowest numbers are in the west. So I-5 is on the west coast. So you can actually, based on road signs, figure out where you are if you didn't have a map. And this idea in mind is that we have these markers to try to help us. Which way are we going? So the next question is, and this is, it's going to work. Go ahead and go next, please. I don't know why this isn't working. Next, please. Okay, this is a sign, picture I took. I love this sign. This is either the Department of Transportation's sense of humor, or it's just irony. But the 2-mile road is a mile away. And sometimes I have questions, and one of those questions I've had for a while is, why do we measure things in a mile? What does that even mean? Why do we have a mile? So because I am a nerd, I look things up. So, excuse me. So the next slide, if we can get to it, please. One more. Okay, the statute mile is 5,280 feet. Why? You ever wonder that? Why is that number a real thing? Okay, go, please. There we go. Okay, it originated from the Roman mille passus, which means 1,000 paces, which measured 5,000 Roman feet. So the word mile is short for millennial or millennium. During the reign of Queen Elizabeth, the mile gained an additional 280 feet to 5,280, which because she was the queen, she could do that. And of course, the Irish mile was 6,720 feet, and the Scottish mile was 5,952 feet, because if you are Scottish or Irish, you don't necessarily want to do what the Queen says. So next up, we have a nautical mile. How do you measure space? Well, if you don't have feet to walk, land and air. So nautical mile, this is on the test, by the way, coming up. A nautical mile was originally defined as the length on the Earth's surface of 1 minute, or 1/60th of a degree, of arc along the meridian north-south line of longitude. So he's got that, right? Okay. In 1929, the nautical mile was redefined as exactly 1.852 kilometers, about 6,076.11549 feet, or 1.1508 statute miles, at an international conference held in Monaco, although the U.S. did not change over to the new International Nautical Mile until 1954. We still use it in both marine and air transportation, and the knot is 1 nautical mile per hour. In case you want to know how fast a knot is, it's 1 nautical mile per hour. So, why do you need to know this is the next question. You're all thinking, that's pretty cool, but where are we going with this? Well, that comes to the next thing. Next slide, please. This is 1 mile south from the Scottish border. Out in the middle of this field, next to this little convenience store, was this post. And it is a Roman mile marker from the year basically 1. And the Scottish border is called Hadrian's Wall. There's literally a wall that the Roman emperor built to keep the Scottish from attacking them. Hadrian's Wall. And we have a term which we call a milestone. This is literally a milestone. It's where we get the name milestone. And the question I have is, did anybody, how do you know, so if you're traveling along in the year 2, and you see this, how far do you know you are away from the wall? How do you know it's 1? There's 1 hole in it. Things we get used to. We like to keep track of how far we've gone and how far we're going. Next, please. So, we have mile markers to tell us where we are and where we're going and how far we are away. When you cross the Idaho border into Washington, it says mile marker 299. By looking at that, you know you are exactly 299 miles from Seattle, where I-90 stops, or starts, depending on which way we're going. So we have these things in our transportation, things in our lives we take for granted that tell us how far we've gone, how far we have left to go, and where we are at that point in time. And we call these things milestones or mile markers. But we also use the term milestone to mark important events in our lives or important events in history. So here comes the next part of the quiz. Ready? Today is July 14th. That's not the quiz. Today is July 14th. 3 events on July 14th in history that are milestones. I like to give history quizzes. So rather than go through this, I'll just go there. In 1881, a milestone, according to history, on July 14th, 1881, this is the day that Sheriff Pat Garrett shot and killed Billy the Kid. Unless, of course, you don't believe that really happened, because, there's always that. 1913, future President Gerald Ford was born on this date. This is his birthday. It's a milestone. Birthdays are milestones. And in 1968, Hank Aaron hit his 500th homer. And I think it's interesting we track sports milestones. In fact, there's a whole section in the news and the paper that says, here's what happened in sports today. I'm not one of those people, but there are people out there who can tell you, oh yeah, I remember that, or I know that, or whatever. It's a milestone for them. They keep track of those things. Okay. Wednesday is July 17th. There are 3 milestones on July 17th. It's Wednesday. First milestone is the happiest place on earth opened up. 1955, Disneyland opened on July 17th. Also, there's a movie, but some of you have seen it. It's called Blackboard Jungle. And it's about schools in 1955. It was not a documentary, it was just a movie. But that's called, by historians, that is the date that rock and roll began. July 17, 1955. There's one more milestone that happened in 1982 on July 17th. And if you were watching the PowerPoint this morning, you know the answer to that question. What's the other milestone? What is it? My anniversary. It's our anniversary. That's a milestone. I don't forget that one. So the idea is we keep track of these things. So next slide, please. So why do we keep track of events? I think it's really interesting that we have a whole system for keeping track of events as well. We have these milestones. It's very important to us. In certain cultures, in our culture, for example, when you are born, the day you're born, how old are you? 0. In certain cultures, when you are born, you are a year old because you've been around for a year. So they keep track of birthdays differently. I don't know how that would go in the U.S. where people don't want to be a year older automatically. But we keep track of things. So 3 reasons we keep track of things. First one is, please, go ahead. We learn from the past. Things happen in the past that we see them and we learn from them. And we say, oh, this happened, this was an important event, what can we learn? The next point is, we apply what we've learned to the present. We say, this happened in the past, we need to know what's happening in the present. If you were buying a piece of land, and this piece of land was at the base of a draw, what do you know happened in the past right there? Water came through there and made that draw. Where do you probably not want to build your house? At the bottom of that draw, because past will tell you. Okay. So the third reason is, of course, to prepare for the future. We keep track of things. We have these milestones. We have these events. And the Bible is fantastically filled with milestones. What's interesting is they are both literal and figurative. So if you would please, go to Joshua 3. I know some people are waiting. Is he going to get to the Bible? We've got a lot of history going on here. Okay. I'd like to give the background first, then go to the material. Joshua 3. If you would just follow along, please. Then Joshua rose early in the morning, and he and all the sons of Israel set out from Shittim and came to the Jordan, and they lodged there before they crossed. At the end of 3 days, the officers went through the midst of the camp, and they commanded the people, saying, when you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God with the Levitical priests carrying it, then you shall set out from your place and go after it. However, There shall be between you and it a distance of about 2,000 cubits by measure. Do not come near it, that you may know the way by which you shall go, for you have not passed this way before. Notice how specific those directions are. 2,000 cubits. And I bet you, knowing how powerful the ark was, they probably made sure that there was a minimum of 2,000 cubits there. Then Joshua said to the people, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. And Joshua spoke to the priests, saying, take up the ark of the covenant, and crossed over ahead of the people. So they took up the ark of the covenant, went ahead of the people. Now the Lord said to Joshua, this day I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, that they may know that just as I have been with Moses, I will be with you. You shall, moreover, command the priests who are carrying the ark of the covenant, saying, when you come to the edge of the waters of the Jordan, you shall stand still in the Jordan. Then Joshua said to the sons of Israel, come here and hear the words of the Lord your God. Joshua said, by this you shall know that the living God is among you, that he will assuredly dispossess from before you the Canaanite, Hittite, Hivite, the Perizzite, the Girgashite, the Amorite, and the Jebusite. Behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth is crossing over ahead of you into the Jordan. Now then, take for yourselves 12 men from the tribes of Israel, one man for each tribe. It shall come about when the soles of the feet of the priests who carry the ark of the Lord of all the earth, rest in the waters of the Jordan waters of the Jordan will be cut off, and the waters which are flowing down from above will stand in one heap. So when the people set out from their tents to cross the Jordan with the priests carrying the ark of the covenant before the people, and when those who carried the ark came into the Jordan, and the feet of the priests carrying the ark were dipped in the edge of the water, for the Jordan overflows all its banks all the days of harvest, the waters which were flowing down from above stood and rose up in one heap, a great distance away at Adam, the city that is beside Zethron, and those which were flowing down toward the sea of the Arabah, the salt sea, were completely cut off. So the people crossed opposite Jericho. And the priests who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan, while all Israel crossed on dry ground until all the nation had finished crossing the Jordan. Okay. Now just have to think for a second. That is an amazing moment in history. And there's a huge amount of faith happening there. Because you just read that the waters of the Jordan were flooding. The Jordan is out of its banks. So how many of you would be willing to to pop into the Bitterroot River when it's flooding in the spring? If you are, that's a scary moment, because water's pretty powerful. So if you're a Levite priest and you've got that ark and you're carrying that ark and you step into that water, that's pure faith. And what's interesting is the entire nation of Israel is behind them, and they are guiding. They are road marker. Because when they step into the water is going to stop and it's going to split. Now, what do we know about that whole event of the Jordan water splitting? It's not the first time it's happened for the Israelites. They've seen God split the Red Sea. So they step into so they're ready to go. There's an archaeologist who does videos about the Holy Land, and he said that according to his calculations, and again, this was him, he's pretty sure that where they crossed at that time, it wasn't an incline, it was just a bank. So you just stepped into the water. When you went in the water, you were above your knees to start with, which means that's not like getting your toes wet first. It's going to work, then your feet wet. It's you go in with both feet, and then you go. Now, when all the nation had finished crossing the Jordan, that's a long time, because there's not just a few people there. When all the nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord spoke to Joshua, saying, "Take for yourselves 12 men from the people, one man from each tribe, and commanded them, saying, Take up for yourselves 12 stones from here out of the middle of the Jordan, from the place where the priest's feet are standing firm, and carry them over with you and lay them down in the lodging place where you will lodge tonight." So Joshua called the 12 men whom he had appointed from the sons of Israel, one man from each tribe, and Joshua said to them, "Cross again to the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan." Go back in. "And each of you take up a stone on his shoulder according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Israel. Let this be a sign among you, so that when your children ask later, saying, what do these stones mean to you? Then you shall say to them, because the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, when it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. So these stones shall become a memorial to the sons of Israel forever. Thus the sons of Israel did as Joshua commanded and took up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, just as the Lord spoke to Joshua, according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Israel. And they carried them over with them to the lodging place and put them down there. And Joshua set up 12 stones in the middle of the Jordan at the place where the feet of the priests who carried the ark of the covenant were standing, and they are there to this day. For the priests who carried the ark were standing in the middle of the Jordan until everything was completed that the Lord had commanded Joshua to speak to the people, according to all that Moses had commanded Joshua. And the people hurried and crossed. I think that's interesting that it doesn't say they crossed, it says they hurried and crossed. And when the people had finished crossing, the ark of the Lord and the priests crossed before the people. The sons of Reuben and the sons of Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh crossed over in battle array before the sons of Israel, just as Moses had spoken to them. About 40,000 equipped for war crossed for battle before the Lord to the desert plains of Jericho. So that would be roughly the population of Missoula crossing this. So this is not a narrow path. This is a huge area. On that day, the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of Israel so that they revered him just as they had revered Moses all the days of his life. Now the Lord said to Joshua, command the priests who carry the ark of the testimony that they come up from the Jordan. So Joshua commanded the priests, saying, come up from the Jordan. It came about when the priests who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord had come up from the middle of the Jordan, and the soles of the priests' feet were lifted up to the dry ground, that the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and went over all its banks as before. Now the people came up from the Jordan on the 10th of the first month and camped at Gilgal on the eastern edge of Jericho. And here come the verses. If you go next slide, please. Those 12 stones which they had taken from the Jordan, Joshua set up at Gilgal. He said to the sons of Israel, when your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, what are these stones? Then you shall inform your children, saying, Israel crossed this Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan before you until you had crossed, just as the Lord your God had done to the Red Sea, which he dried up before us until we had crossed, that all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of God is mighty, so that you may fear the Lord your God forever. They literally set up a set of standing stones, a mile marker. So years later, generations later, when children would ask, what do these stones represent? What do these things mean? They could say, let me tell you what these stand for, what these stones literally stand for. They represent a moment in history that is key to the nation of Israel and to the fact that God is our Lord. Standing stones. So we'd go ahead and call this a mile marker, because it is a milestone in Israel's history and a literal standing stone. So, if you would please, go to Exodus 14. This is why I'm not a preacher but a teacher, because we're not going to go verse by verse. We're going to do this in a chunk. So to know this history of the Jordan, we look back at the history of the Red Sea. And here's here it is again. But Moses said to the people, Exodus 14, verse 13, but Moses said to the people, do not fear, stand by and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you have seen today, you will never see them again forever. The Lord will fight for you while you keep silent. So they're standing at the edge of the Red Sea. The Egyptians are coming to chase them. They believe that they're trapped, and Moses said, no, that's not it at all. Then the Lord said to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Tell the sons of Israel to go forward. As for you, lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it. And the sons of Israel shall go through the midst of the sea on dry land. As for me, behold, I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they will go in after them, and I will be honored through Pharaoh. I want you to kind of note that verse right there. And I will be honored through Pharaoh and all his army, through his chariots and his horsemen. Then the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I am honored through Pharaoh, through his chariots and his horsemen. There's a message there for both sides. The angel of God, who had been going before the camp of Israel, moved and went behind them, and the pillar of cloud moved from before them and stood behind them. So it came between the camp of Egypt and the camp of Israel, and there was the cloud along with the darkness, yet it gave light at night. Thus the one did not come near the sea all night. So it took Israel all night to move across the Red Sea. Not like in the movie, it takes like 2 minutes in the movie. So this is an all-night event, which means that this isn't just a quick thing. This is going to take hours. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord swept the sea back by a strong east wind all night and turned the sea into dry land, so the waters were divided. The sons of Israel went through the midst of the sea on dry land, and the waters were like a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. Then the Egyptians took up the pursuit, and on all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen went in after them into the midst of the sea. At the morning watch, the Lord looked down on the army of the Egyptians, threw the pillar of fire and cloud, and brought the army of the Egyptians into confusion. He caused their chariot wheels to swerve, and he made them drive with difficulty. So the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from Israel, for the Lord is fighting for them against the Egyptians." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, so the waters may come back over the Egyptians, over their chariots and their horsemen." So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned its normal state at daybreak, while the Egyptians were fleeing right into it. Then the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen, even Pharaoh's entire army that had gone into the sea after them. Not even one of them remained. But the sons of Israel walked on dry land through the midst of the sea, and the waters were like a wall to them on the right hand and on the left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. When Israel saw the great power which the Lord had used against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and his servant Moses. And in the next chapter of Genesis, we're not going to read, the first thing that they do after crossing is they have this amazing praise service because of what they just witnessed. I think it'd be hard not to do, to see something that amazing and then not spend some time praising. And I think sometimes we don't do that. I think sometimes we see an event, or sometimes we witness a miracle, or we witness something amazing, and we go, "Wow, that was pretty cool," and we don't take time to actually praise. So I think praising for the lightning was pretty amazing. So a few years ago, the museum in Bozeman had a King Tut exhibit. And it turns out that, according to most historians, that the Pharaoh who was the Pharaoh, his second son, because his first son died in the 10th plague, his other son became Pharaoh. And there's evidence that the entire nation of Egypt worshipped a different god. They got rid of all their other gods, and they worshipped a different god. And that he kept referring to as the true God. And he only got to reign a few years, and then he had a mysterious death, and he died under mysterious circumstances, and his son King Tut took over, and he was a very young child, and he died very young also. And then a different person came in and took over, who had been one of the priests. So there's evidence, historians say that there's evidence that the survivors who saw that actually began to worship the God of Israel because of what they had seen. And for a while, that was a major part of Egypt's culture. So when God says, "I'm going to show the Egyptians and the Israelites who is Lord," it's not just a statement of power, but it's a statement for a chance to worship. So again, another milestone. We talk about the crossing the Red Sea. I hear people use that phrase. Well, it's like parting the Red Sea. So it's a milestone to us. Then, of course, we read Genesis 9, which is a rainbow, and it's a marker to us. How many people, when there's a rainbow, go outside and stare at it? How many people, if you're driving, pull over and look at the rainbow? How many people in here have taken pictures of rainbows and they're never as cool on picture? All right, okay. There's something about that. And to this day, rainbows still fascinate us. And it not just because it's cool, but because we know innately what that means. And even unbelievers are captivated by the idea of the rainbow. It's important to them. Okay. So, moving on with standing stones. Go to the next slide, please. Go ahead. Okay. All right, other examples. The rainbow we just talked about. Next one, go to Genesis 28. You thought we were going to do a bunch of Bible stuff today, did you? Okay. Genesis 28. Jacob. Verse 10. Genesis 28, verse 10. Then Jacob departed from Beersheba and went toward Haran. He came to a certain place and spent the night there because the sun had set. And he took one of the stones of the place and put it under his head and lay down in that place. I want you to keep noticing the reference to stones, that this keeps coming up again and again and again. He had a dream, and behold, a ladder was set on the earth with its top reaching to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending, descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give it to you and your descendants. Your descendants will also be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread about to the west and the east, to the north and to the south. And in you and in your descendants shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Behold, I am with you, and I will keep you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I promised you. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. He was afraid and said, How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. By the way, we overuse the word awesome a lot. The word awesome literally means to be unable to comprehend. It is beyond our ability to grasp. So Jacob rose up early in the morning and took the stone that he had put under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on its top. He called the name of that place Bethel. However, previously the name of the city had been Luz. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, If God will be with me and will keep me on this journey that I take, and will give me food to eat and garments to wear, and I return to my father's house in safety, then the Lord will be my God. This stone which I have set up as a pillar will be God's house, and of all that you give me, I will surely give a tenth to you. So he sets a standing stone for himself. I'll remember this place. Here's this stone. Jump now to chapter 35. A lot of stuff happens between these two chapters. But go to 35, please. Genesis 35, verse 9. Then God appeared to Jacob again when he came from Paddan Aram, and he blessed him. God said to him, Your name is Jacob. You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel shall be your name. Thus he called him Israel. God also said to him, I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall come from you, and kings shall come forth from you. The land which I gave to Abraham and Isaac, I will give it to you, and I will give the land to your descendants after you. Then God went up from him in the place where he had spoken with him. Jacob set up a pillar in the place where he had spoken with him, a pillar of stone, and he poured out a drink offering on it. He also poured oil on it. So Jacob named the place where God had spoken with him Bethel. Jacob sets up two standing stones, one at the beginning, one later on, in the same place. And at this point, he set up a standing stone when he first got there. He set up a pillar of stone the second time because this is a much more important milestone, a much more important marker. His name is changed. He becomes the leader of a nation. And he has a direct encounter with God. Again, a standing stone. Okay, next slide, please. So, application. A lot of history, application. First one is this. There are people who are strong godly examples to us. We call those people usually what? Pillars. Talk about people being pillars in the church. That's a standing stone. It's a pillar. And there are all these people that represent Christianity, that represent true faith. For example, look at Hebrews 11. We actually call Hebrews 11 the Hall of Faith. And there's a list of people, of people who changed history, who represented God, who were blessed by God, who died for God. There's a list of people who represent pillars of our faith. Those are standing stones. Those are milestones. There's a song out there which we don't usually sing. There's a song out there called Dare to be a Daniel. Anybody remember that song? Okay. Why Daniel? What did Daniel do that was so amazing? Dare to be a Daniel. What did Daniel do? He did a lot. Okay. When the king said, bow before my statue? No. I'll die first if that's what I have to do. That takes a lot of courage, takes a lot of faith. Dare to be a Daniel. So he stood for what he believed in. We actually had a song we sang at the beginning of this. standing on the promises of God. A lot of people who stood their ground. We call that, again, the idea of a standing stone. Go to the next slide, please. So, our personal testimony is another version of a standing stone, of a milestone. There are people who can remember the exact day and time that they accepted Christ. There are people who have that moment as a milestone in their life where they have the old and the new, and they can remember that moment. They were old enough to remember that moment. And it was such an impact on their lives. We even talk about the fact that that is a marker between the old and the new. That is the past us. That is the former us. We are new creatures. That's a milestone. It's a mile marker. It's a standing stone. And that is part of that person's testimony, when they can say, I remember the moment I accepted Christ and this was my life changing. It's a milestone, it's a reference, and it's a point that is obviously the most important point in their life. And that becomes a milestone for them. Some people actually celebrate it as a second birthday. I think that's pretty cool. So that for others. Other things that happen in our lives. There are people who've had experiences as Christians that change their lives. I will tell you that my roommate in college, you know him, Brett Hamilton, he's a missionary in Poland. He and I were roommates in college, and he was in his last year of becoming a mechanical engineer. He was excited about becoming a mechanical engineer. And his girlfriend, who is now his wife, his girlfriend said, I'm going with a mission trip to Poland for a week. Go over spring break. Go with me. And he said to me, I don't want to go to Poland. I've got studying to do. I've got things to do. But he went. And he came back, and we were sitting in the apartment, and he said, I don't know what to do. I really believe God is calling me to be a missionary in Poland. He says, I went over thinking, I'm going to be a mechanical engineer, and I came back saying to myself, I think I'm going to be a missionary in Poland. I feel really called to that moment. What do you think? And I said, I think you probably need to listen to that. Because that's, you didn't want to go, and then you come back and you say, I need to go back. That's a pretty impressive moment. That was a milestone in his life. We all have those moments, those milestones that we remember, that we use as part of our testimony. That also means that we need to be standing stones. That not only do we need to be lights to the world, we need to be examples and be pillars and be standing stones and be milestones to the world. Because it's one thing to be a light, but it's also, because that's God, you're just reflecting God's light. When we are called to be lights to the world, we're called to reflect God's light. We don't generate the light, we're reflectors. To be a standing stone also requires faith, because you now have to stand where you know you're supposed to stand, or move when you're supposed to move. So this idea of mile markers and standing stones and milestones is prevalent throughout the Bible. And if you go through and just look at some of that, and over and over again, you see where they built a pillar, they built a marker, they marked this place. This is a moment in our history that this happens again and again and again and again. Unfortunately, there are places out there that are labeled, that are religious sites, that people go worship the site instead of what it's supposed to be, instead of supposed to represent. And that's missing the mark. You don't represent the thing, you don't worship the thing. And so, I guess I want to close by saying, again, when you see a mile marker, and you think to yourself, okay, I know how far I've gone, I know how far I have left to go to get to my destination. Or you see a road sign that says 2 mile road, 1 mile away, and you know that you're being given directions. I often believe that that's also a reminder to us that we're also traveling a spiritual road that is full of markers and full of signs and very clear things. This is where you're supposed to go, or this is important, or you need to remember this, or you need to mark this. And so I think it's interesting. There's something innate in us that we measure things. We like to measure and keep track of things. I don't think that's just an accident. I think that is God-given. You need to remember these things. You need to record these things. You need to remember these things. And so just want to close by saying, the next time you see a mile marker, it's not just a place in the road, it's also, I think, a reminder. Okay, so let's pray. Heavenly Father, once again, we just praise you for the power of your word and for the amazing clarity and detail that you've given us. I just pray that you'll be with each person here. And just pray that also that we will pay attention to those moments, to those markers, to those signs, to those indications. We just praise you in Jesus' name. Amen.